What's up guys, today we're going to be building basically what I would consider my ultimate Glock. Laid out in front of me are all the different things I'm going to be installing on the Glock, as well as a couple tools used for installing them. Starting out with the main gun. It is a Glock 45, and it is the MOS version, which are what these plates are for. These come with every MOS gun, and this is how you mount an optic to your pistol. So we'll get more into that in a minute, but here it is. This is the Glock 45. And you can see it is the MOS version with this top little plate up here. But what I love about the Glock 45 is it's got the slide length of the 19, but the grip length of the 17. It gives you a really nice good grip, but it's super balanced. There's not a whole lot of weight hanging over the front, which gives you a really nice, crisp recoil impulse. And overall, this is probably my favorite Glock to shoot. It does come with 3 17-round magazines, and it also comes with these back straps for changing the grip. If you got fatter hands or larger hands, you can make the grip fit just right for you. I'm not going to use these because I prefer just a standard regular grip. But yeah, that is the base gun. That's what I'm going to be building on. So let's go over and see what I'm going to be adding to it. Alright, because I did get the MOS version, I wanted to get a really awesome optic. And there's nothing better than the Trijicon RMR. This guy is tiny and super rugged and reliable. And this is definitely known as one of the best optics for handguns that you can get. And I have the RMO7 version, which has a 6.5 MOA dot. I prefer the large dot for rapid target acquisition. It makes it super easy to find that dot and super easy to get that dot on target, as opposed to one of like the 3.25 MOA or the 1 MOA ones. If you're not trained super well on those, you'll have to do a little hunting around to find that dot. I also have the Trijicon MOS kit, and this includes the shorter length screws that you're going to need for mounting the red dot. The ones that come with the RMR are going to be way too long for the MOS. This also includes a sealing plate as well. I also went with the Ameriglo GL429 sights. These are a suppressor height sight, but they're an XL instead of a 2XL or 3XL. Ameriglo recommends a 3XL version, which is a super high rear sight, and I really don't like it. It sits super high up off the deck height of the RMR. And the RMR doesn't have a super large window already, so having your rear sight take up a third of it is not really something that I want to do. The 429s allow you to get just barely enough rear sight to where you can still use it, but it's going to be out of the way 99% of the time, which is what you want. And of course, these are all blacked out rear and a blacked out front, so I don't have any distractions. And I'm also going to be installing my Streamlight TLR1 HL. And a couple tools that you're going to need a Glock front sight tool, and you're going to need a rear sight pusher. And this will make it super easy to drift off that rear sight and then install the new one. You can try and do it without this. You can try to use a punch and a hammer, but I would not recommend that. It's super difficult and there's a really good chance that you could damage something. So anyway, let's go ahead and head over to the workbench and start taking these sights off. First thing I'm going to do is disassemble the gun, taking off the slide and removing the barrel and recoil spring. And obviously, make sure it is unloaded. Very important. And remove this. Alright. And then recoil spring. And barrel. Alright, and now we're going to take off the rear sight. Going to start with the rear and then move to the front. Alright, and here you can see I have the slide set up in the sight pusher, and then I have that sight pusher mounted to the workbench. So this setup here will be super sturdy, and it'll make it a lot easier drifting off this rear sight and installing the new one. So if I go ahead and tighten here, this should just start to drift this off. And you can see that it is moving. And there it is. So now I can remove this slide and take out the old rear sight. Alright, and here you can see that slide channel. Alright, let's go ahead and install our new rear sight. And when looking at these Ameriglo sights, you can see one side has a little more of a ledge than the other side, and that's the side that's going to be facing the rear of the slide. You can also look at the top. The front of the sight has a wider opening than the rear, so that means it's going to be installed in this orientation. So what I like to do is go ahead and install it partially in the slide channel, and you can see it slides about a third of the way on, and now we're going to use the pusher to push it the rest of the way on. We're ready to start pushing. And this is going to be super tight, by the way. But you want to go until it is perfectly even on each side. Obviously, we are not there yet. Almost there. Let's go ahead and back it off and see where we're at. That's really close. It needs a tiny bit more. You can see how close that is. It needs just a tiny bit more. It's slightly more on the right still than the left. Alright, let's see if that did anything. Alright, and that looks pretty perfect to me. Let's go ahead and move on to the front sight. Now that the rear is done, we're going to go ahead and move to the front, and this is substantially easier. This is the easy one. The rear sight is the hardest one. But when you have one of those pushers, it's not that bad. And to change that front sight, we need to go underneath the slide here, and you can see that little hex bolt up front. That is the front sight. That's what holds it on. So we need to loosen that and remove it. And that's what the front sight tool is for. We just want to lay the slide down flat on the table, go in from the top and loosen. And this is actually going to be pretty loose from the factory. And there it is. And you can see that little bolt there in the head of the tool. And this tool actually has a magnet built into it to hold this there, so that's super helpful, especially when trying to start a new one. Put that off to the side, and let's go ahead and remove this. We should just be able to pull this straight out, and yep, there it is. So I am going to go ahead and reinstall this into the old sight and keep this off to the side. Alright, and here is the new front sight, and you can see it also comes with a new bolt. So let's go ahead and loosen that up. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and place this into the front of the slide. Also, the serrated edge on the sight is going to face the rear. They do come in this little oval shape, and that helps them fit into the slide. Okay, just like that. I am going to use just a tiny bit of blue thread locker. So yeah, just a tiny little bit on that bolt. So now you kind of want to hold this with one hand, making sure this sight doesn't fall out, and then go in from the back with the new screw and thread it in. This does have a tiny bit of play left and right, so you want to go ahead and make sure that is perfectly straight before that thread locker dries. Go ahead and torque that down and you are done. That's it. Alright, now we have our MOS kit. So for the RMR, we're going to need plate number 2, which is right here. So let's get that out of there. And you can see how these work. They're just little adapter plates that the red dot sits on top of, and then this gets screwed into the frame. So that allows you to swap red dots without having to get a slide milled, and you're not locked into a certain platform. Now we're going to get the wrench out and 2 of the screws. Okay, put that off to the side. First step, we got to remove the plate that comes pre-installed, just a smooth factory plate. So, and be very careful, do not strip these, because if you strip these, you're not going to have a fun time. You're going to need to get drilled out, and then you're going to have to clean everything up, and it's just not fun, trust me. Alright, loosening these up. And do the other side. Now we can go ahead and take these out all the way. And put these off to the side. These screws are a different size than the other screws, and you do not want to use these screws whenever you go ahead and install that plate. Alright, there it is. And this comes off. And oddly enough, this plate on my Glock 45 is plastic. I believe on some of the other guns this was metal, but they're using plastic cover plates now, which I don't really see a problem with it, because you're most likely, if you buy an MOS, you're not going to just run it stock. But remove that. Now we can go ahead and put the optic on it. So let's go ahead and organize everything here. We can go ahead and move these off to the side. Do not need those anymore. We got the plate, 2 screws for the plate, the wrench for the plate, got the optic. We can open up the screw kit for the MOS. So we have the new sealing plate, as well as the wrench for these 2 screws here. And these are going to install the optic onto the MOS plate. And also you want to make sure you install your battery, and you want to make sure it's installed the correct way, because the battery is underneath the optic on these. So if you forget it, you're going to have to take the entire optic off again to get the battery back in. And definitely use a new name brand battery, specifically Duracell if you have it. I do not have it, I have an Energizer battery. But if you have an older Type 1 RMR, these contacts weren't quite as tight, and the Energizer batteries are a tiny bit slimmer than the Duracell ones, and that would occasionally cause it to flicker. But we have a Type 2 RMR, so that should not be an issue. Alright, and the first thing that I would do is go ahead and test fit everything to make sure it's all going to work properly. So to do that, make sure you install the battery into the optic, put your sealing plate on, and then put the optic on that, and run these screws in there. And I would go ahead and tighten them up just to make sure. And here I have everything tightened up just how it's going to fit on the gun, and what I want to double check is that these screws do not protrude through the bottom of this plate, because then they would be grinding against the slide here and you'd be damaging things. Don't want to do that. So if you look here at these 2 screws, they are perfectly flat with the rest. And what I would also do is get some oil and coat the bottom of this as well as the top of the slide, because you're probably not going to take this off anytime soon, and this will prevent any rust from forming. So we got some oil on there, good. And we got some oil on the slide, awesome. Nice coating on each. So let's go ahead and install the MOS plate. Put it right up front here, it'll lock into place. And now we can use the 2 MOS screws here to install that. And once again, be very careful not to strip these. That will absolutely ruin your day if that happens. I'm going to get both of them started, that way I can make sure it's going on evenly. Only using the small side of the wrench for torque. These do have Loctite on them, so they're going to be a little firm. Alright, and these are both tightened down snug. Now I'm going to put a tiny bit of torque on them with the long end. Pinching it up here. You don't want to grab it out here because you'll have a whole lot less control. Right at the front here. Good. And good. Now that plate is on. Let's go ahead and put on the optic. And once again, I am going to put a little more oil right on the top here. So that way when I put my plate on, it will also have oil on it. I'm actually going to rub a little bit of this oil onto the plate too. There we go. Alright, so let's set the plate on here. In position. And my seal plate has a little bit of a bend to it. See, it's a little bit convex shaped here. And what I'm doing is I'm putting the convex side up, so it puts a little bit of additional pressure on the battery. Plate goes on, battery is installed, and then the optic can sit right on top. So I'm gonna put these screws back in and tighten everything down. Alright, I'm gonna use even pressure here. Make sure I don't torque one side down more than the other. Just to be careful, I don't want to get anything crooked. Alright, and snug them down there with the long side. And now I'm going to use the short side and just put a tiny bit of torque on each bolt. Good. And good. And that is it. Red dot is on. Let's clean up some of this oil. Everything is looking awesome. And you can see that the slots in the plate are lining up with these slots in the slide. And that's very important. That means everything is mounted right. And we're good to go. Now let's put the gun back together. Barrel in. And you can oil it a little more if you want. This actually has a decent amount of oil from the factory, so I'm not going to mess with it. Guide rod in. Push that down. And there it is. Everything is done. Alright, let's get our Streamlight mounted up now. And this is super easy. And when I find it, I am going to swap this adapter out because it has the GL adapter, which stands for Glock. And that means Gen 1 through 4. The Gen 5 pistols actually widen this slot a tiny bit to make it the same as Picatinny specifications. So you can see when I install this, it is going to have a little bit of back and forth play. That's what the other adapter fixes. But for now, this will be fine. Alright, and that is it. There it is, the ultimate Glock pistol. I really love how this feels and how everything looks, and that red dot is super awesome. And you can see what I was talking about with the sights. They poke up just enough to where you can see them, but not enough to where they block this window. And that's why these 429s I think are the best backup sights you can do for the MOS, because they're absolutely perfect, especially all blacked out. You're not going to have any distractions. So we changed out the sights, put an optic on it, and put a light on it. And that's really all you need to do to one of these. I don't like swapping out tons of parts on Glocks because that's when they become unreliable. Out of the factory, these things are tanks, but if you start putting slides and barrels and springs and a whole bunch of untested parts, then they start to become a little less unreliable. But an optic and sights are a really good improvement. And these iron sights are really awesome. They peak right over the deck height of that red dot, and if you notice, they co-witness perfectly. But when you're trying to shoot, it's gonna look like that, and it gives you plenty of room in that window to see your dot. And obviously you gotta put the TLR1 HL on it. In my opinion, this is definitely one of the best weapon lights. But yeah, that is it. So in a future video, I will be taking this out to the range, getting some rounds through it, and sighting it in. But until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.